thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today, we have Ashira presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Ashira is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during the Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and Legal Aid is not representing you at this time. Be sure to not reveal personal details about yourself and to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Ashira to get us started.
Hi, my name is Ashira Corpening. As Marissa said, I am a public benefits staff attorney in the Greensboro office here at Legal Aid, and I'm going to talk a little bit about SNAP, some very basic information about SNAP. If you're not super familiar, this will be helpful. So first, what is SNAP? First of all, SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It has a couple names. Here in North Carolina, it's Food and Nutrition Services, or FNS, and then colloquially, people refer to it as food stamps. These are all the same program, and it is a program that provides low-income households with money each month to help them purchase food. I think most people know the money is placed on an EBT card, which is reusable, and it can only be used to purchase eligible foods at stores or wherever EBT is accepted. So applying for SNAP is, you can do it in a couple different ways. You could do it in person at a DSS office, and if you go in person to a DSS office, you have the right to file an application on the same day that you visit, so long as you visit during office hours. So if you go there in person, they have to let you fill it out as long as you go during their office hours. You can also fax an application to DSS, you can mail it to them, or you can use their online application system called ePass. You'll go through all the questions online, submit the application that way, and then you wouldn't have to send anything by fax, mail, or go there or anything like that if you do the application online. After you submit the application, you'll have to be interviewed by a caseworker. That's just the application process. They'll go over what you've submitted, ask you any outstanding questions, and that's just standard. I have a link here with more information about how to apply if any of that is not clear. So for basic eligibility, in order to receive SNAP or FNS, you have to be eligible. That means you have an eligible immigration status. You have to be a resident of North Carolina, and that is for obviously North Carolina specific FNS, and you have to meet their income rules. For some people, there are also work requirements. I think it was commonly known that work requirements were paused or waived during the public health emergency. Those have now started again. So we'll go over the work rules a little bit later, but they are in place since COVID. The first eligibility rule was that you have an eligible immigrant status. So the SNAP immigrant eligibility rules give us those eligible statuses. You can be a U.S. citizen, a lawful permanent resident, and then we have a note here that for lawful permanent residents, you generally can't receive SNAP until 5 years after you've lawfully entered the U.S. Another eligible status is refugees, asylees, and then Afghan special immigrants and parolees are all eligible immigrant statuses. And it's important to note that not everyone in the household has to have the eligible immigration status, like one of the ones listed above. You can submit an application to DSS or SNAP with just the members of your household that have the immigration status that's eligible for SNAP. And DSS can't then require you to give a social security number for people in your household who you're not applying for SNAP for as well. So if there's some people eligible, some people not, you can submit an application for only eligible people, and DSS should not make you provide the social security numbers of those who are not. So another eligibility rule was financial, like meet the income rules for SNAP. Some households are what's called categorically eligible. That means you have an income that is below 200% of the federal poverty level, and there are no disqualified household members. This changes, like what 200% of the federal poverty level is, changes by how many people are in your house. But those who get this categorical eligibility don't have an asset limit. And we'll talk a little bit about what an asset limit means, but here's a chart that gives you an estimate of what that would be for different household sizes. One thing to consider is that there is a SNAP felony controlled substance ban. This means that people who committed and were convicted under federal or state law on or after August 23rd, 1996, of an offense that's classified as a felony by the law of the jurisdiction involved with the element of possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance are permanently disqualified from SNAP. Now, there are exceptions to that permanent disqualification. If you're a person who is convicted of a Class H or I felony, and it involved the possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance committed on or after August 23rd, 1996, North Carolina, you can reestablish eligibility for SNAP if you meet the minimum disqualification period after the release from custody, which is 6 months. And then you're also referred to the area mental health authority for an assessment. So that's specific to those Class H or Class I felonies within that controlled substance ban. There could be an exception for you if you meet those two qualifications. There are, as we mentioned earlier, work requirements. So these are requirements to continue receiving SNAP benefits for specific people. An able-bodied adult without dependents, or an ABOD is what we call them, must work 80 hours a month, an average of 20 hours a week, or be participating in a work program for 80 hours a month, or an average of 20 hours a week, to qualify for SNAP. For ABODs, this work can be employment, like just general employment, self-employment, it can be volunteer work, work in exchange for goods or services, or some kind of combination of those equaling 80 hours a month, or like an average of 20 hours a week. There is a good cause exception for people or ABODs who are subject to this rule. If you would have worked 80 hours a month, like at your job or self-employment, but you missed some work for a good cause, you could still be considered to have met these work requirements if the absence from your work was temporary and you keep your job. So some examples of that is if you get sick and you miss some work, you have an emergency and you have to leave, or your car breaks down and you can't go in for a certain number of days and you don't meet these 80 hour a month average, 80 hours a month, or the average of 20 hours a week, you could get a good cause exception. And if you're an ABOD and you don't meet these work requirements, like generally, not just like one of these good cause exceptions, you can only receive SNAP for any 3 months in a 36-month period. So there are some work requirement exemptions. Not everyone is an ABOD. If you're under 18 years old or at least 55 years old, then you're exempt from those work requirements. The other exemption categories are if you're in a SNAP household that contains a member under the age of 18, pregnant, homeless, a veteran. And we have a note here, regardless of the conditions of your discharge, if you're between 18 and 24 and were in foster care when you turned 18, or if you're unfit for employment. This could mean several things as listed here. It could be you're getting workers' comp, disability benefits, or Medicaid based on a disability. You could be deemed medically certified as unfit for employment, unable to work due to alcohol or drug addiction, at least a half-time student, or quote, obviously unfit for work based on workers' observation or judgment. These people could potentially be exempted from the SNAP work requirement. So if you are an ABOD or an able-bodied adult without dependents, you have to report your work activity to DSS. You should also report to DSS if you believe you meet an exemption and work with them on whether you meet that. It's important that you cannot assume that DSS already has correct or updated information about you or in your file. Some examples of things you want to be sure of reporting to DSS is whether you've moved, your number, starting work or work changing, whether a child might be living with you, even if it's not your child, if you're pursuing Social Security benefits or unemployment benefits, or if you've recently become pregnant. These are all things you want to keep updated information with DSS in your file. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure that you're receiving the maximum allotment that you're entitled to for SNAP. DSS determines your household's monthly SNAP benefit based on income, household size, and what your expenses are. Household size or household is something specific in this context. It's not just people who live with you, it's people who live together and buy or cook food together. Both of those things need to be present to be counted as a household. Generally, the higher monthly income of your household, the less SNAP benefits you'll receive. However, if you have higher monthly expenses, you could get more in SNAP benefits. We have a little chart here that just lists what the maximum benefit amount is for these household sizes. That would be if you're getting as much as you possibly could in SNAP benefits each month based on this many people being in your household. So there are expense verifications. They require these verifications because they're necessary to determine, first of all, your eligibility. And there are some recommended verifications and then optional verifications. And those optional ones can be used to determine your benefit levels. It is in your best interest to provide that extra optional recommended verifications to DSS. Because providing those recommended verifications, make sure that you maximize your benefits. If you're trying to get as close to that maximum amount that I showed on the last slide. Required verifications are those that show your eligibility, like your identity, your citizenship status, household size, Social Security number, but remember only for those who are applying for the benefits and then your income, because those are used to determine whether you're eligible for SNAP. But there are recommended verifications, which are utility expenses, mortgage or rental expenses, property taxes and insurance, medical expenses for specified persons, or legally obligated child support payments and child care expenses. These are things you would want to report to DSS, even though you're not required to, because it could help you raise your benefit amount and just really ensure that you're getting all of the benefits that you are entitled to under the program. Okay, so once you receive the benefit, you're eligible, you have to do something called recertifying for SNAP. Now, most SNAP households have to recertify every 6 months. How this works is DSS will mail your house a form. And that form has to be returned to DSS by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. Now, this helps to avoid a potential lapse in your benefits, and best practice is to submit all that required information and also those recommended verifications at the same time. The timeline can be a little confusing, so I have an example here that Julie's household is certified for SNAP benefits from January 1st to June 30th. June 30th being the last month of June being the last month of the certification period. So in early June, Julie would get a recertification form in the mail from DSS. In order for Julie to submit that form timely, DSS has to receive it by June 15th. Because June is the last certification month, that form has to be submitted by the 15th of that month. During the certification, so you get the recertification form and you want to put, those recommended verifications, all that on there. But let's say you're during the certification period, there are some things you still have to report during that period. So if you're an ABOD or an able-bodied adult without dependents, and you stop working that average of 80 hours a month, which is under what's required under the work rules, you have to report that to DSS. Another thing that you have to report is whether someone in your household, in the SNAP household, receives lottery or gambling winnings that are $4,250 or more, or if you're in a household and your income goes from below 130% of the federal poverty level to above. These are all things that you must report to DSS if these happen during that certification period. Now, your household is not required to report an increase in expenses or a decrease in income. However, reporting those things could increase your SNAP benefits, especially an increase in expenses or you're working less. Like, these are things you want to report just in case they increase your monthly allotment. Okay, so you do have appeal rights with SNAP. Sometimes DSS will take an action, it impacts your SNAP benefits, and you don't agree. You have something called appeal rights. An appeal means that you're going to request a hearing on the action that is taken by DSS. When they send you a notice in the mail that's like notifying you to change about your benefits, you want to read that notice. And then in there, usually toward the end, there's something that explains your appeal rights. And then importantly, it gives you a deadline to appeal. So there are two types of hearings that you could possibly have for SNAP. There are state fair hearings and then administrative disqualification hearings. The state fair hearings are hearings that will be about your eligibility for the program, the amount of benefits you receive, or if you get something called an overpayment, meaning that you received benefits that the state believes you were not entitled to, and they want you to pay them back. That's an overpayment. Or if you have an ADH, an administrative disqualification hearing, that will be about an intentional program violation, which for shorthand would say IPV. State fair hearings are an opportunity for a fair hearing, and they have to be provided to any household negatively impacted by a DSS action that affects the household's participation in SNAP. So to appeal, again, you'll get that notice, you'll read it. You want to make a clear statement. This could be calling your caseworker and saying you want to appeal, or writing something down to a DSS that you want to present your case to a higher authority. Generally, a request for a fair hearing is required to be made within 90 calendar days on the date of that DSS notice. So whatever that date is, add 90 days. However, in many cases, DSS has to continue your SNAP benefits at whatever level you were receiving them if your hearing request is made sooner within 10 days. So if they send you a notice saying, we're changing your amount and you don't agree that it's correct, you want to have a hearing. If you appeal within 10 days, you have the chance of keeping your benefits at the previous amount until you figure that out. So it could be in your best interest to request that hearing within 10 days. When you get to the hearing, it is conducted by a state hearing officer. They are from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and they'll be the person who listens to your evidence and makes a decision. Administrative disqualification hearings are different. They're used only when DSS believes it has, quote, clear and convincing evidence that an individual has committed one or more acts of intentional program violation, or IPV. An IPV is when a SNAP household member knowingly, willfully, and with deceitful intent commits a fraudulent act. Examples of these fraudulent acts that you can get an IPV for are making false statements or hiding information in order to get the SNAP benefits and you would not have otherwise been eligible for them, misusing your EBT card, like selling your benefits or trading SNAP benefits for something else, or using SNAP benefits to buy food for or share food with someone that's not in your SNAP household. These are examples of things that you could get an IPV for, that DSS believes I have clear and convincing evidence to show that you've done one of these things. You'll get a notice in the mail, just like we talked about before. If you get an IPV, you'll get a notice in the mail that you're being accused. And that notice will include the date for this local administrative disqualification hearing. DSS will usually include a waiver form in that notice that's like, I agree to waive the disqualification hearing and accept the consequences. Important, you don't have to sign that waiver. You do not have to sign that. You can go to a hearing, present your case on why you believe DSS is incorrect, and not waive your right to make any argument if you don't want to. The hearing officer for local disqualification hearings is different. It's someone at DSS. They just happen to not have been previously involved in your case. The hearing officer must provide the SNAP household with a copy of whatever their decision is. They usually send it via certified mail. And then from there, the household has 15 calendar days from the date of that decision to appeal. Now, if the household were to appeal again, you will have a state disqualification hearing, and that would be with a hearing officer from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, just like the other state fair hearing. So intentional program violations, or IPVs, are a serious accusation because they come with consequences. Your first IPV results in a 12-month disqualification from the program. If you get another IPV, that's a 2-year SNAP disqualification, and then your third IPV would be permanent SNAP disqualification. You would no longer be able to receive benefits in the SNAP program if you receive 3 IPVs. If you misrepresent a residence or identity to receive multiple benefits, like let's say you claim you live in North Carolina, but you don't really, so you're trying to get benefits in North Carolina, that could result in a 10-year SNAP disqualification. And importantly, all adult members of a SNAP household could be jointly responsible for paying back those benefits. Let's say that, like in the example of misrepresenting your residence, saying you lived in North Carolina when you didn't, all adult members of your household could be responsible for paying back the benefits that the household was not supposed to receive. So that's another pretty big consequence of an IPV. So you do have rights during the hearing process. First of all, before the hearing, that anyone in the household, or if you have a representative, they can review the case file and whatever records DSS is going to use against you at the hearing. The household can represent themselves, go in there and present your own case, say your own evidence. You could retain legal counsel, like a lawyer, or have another spokesperson, I don't know, someone who you think would do a good job at articulating themselves and presenting your case. You could have another spokesperson represent you. You also have the right to bring your own witnesses to a hearing, submit any evidence that you have, like records, receipts, statements from other people, anything that you think will help explain your case and show why DSS was not correct in your case. At the hearing, you can also question or challenge any testimony or evidence presented by DSS. They make a statement like, someone told us this thing about you. You have the right to say, well, who told you that? Or, challenge whatever testimony or evidence they present. A household can also request a postponement of up to 30 days of that hearing. If you need more time to prepare your evidence, if you want to look for a lawyer, you can request a postponement. With that, I will add a note that the month of November coming up, FNS benefits may be disrupted by the federal shutdown if it continues. That could mean that November FNS benefits may not be issued on your normal schedule that you usually receive them, or in your usual benefit amount, or at all. It's really unclear right now. However, applications have to still be processed under normal application processing timelines for the time being. So still submit your application, but just be aware that there is some, I guess, questionableness about the November FNS benefits. And with that, I'll take any questions. I'll remind you, though, I am not your attorney, so I can answer general questions, but I can't really advise you about your benefits or your case.
Awesome. So if you have a question, you either need to type it in the Q&A box on Zoom or put it in the comments section on Facebook. You cannot unmute in this forum, so if you have a question, you need to put it in either one of those chat boxes. I don't see any questions at the moment, but gonna wait just a few moments here to see if any questions do come in. All right, as I am not seeing any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of you for joining us, with a special thank you to Ashira for for presenting for us. If you would like to review anything she discussed today, a copy of today's event will be posted to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available for about 30 days, and after that, available at any time on Legal Aid of North Carolina's YouTube page. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn programs, such as Wills and Powers of Attorneys, Medicaid, Fair Housing, you can do so on our website at www.legalaidnc.org/clinics. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their afternoon.